The Demogorgon starts out looking like a scary but relatively straightforward monster in Stranger Things. But by the time the story reaches season 5, it's become something much bigger and more developed. From their creepy origins to the crazy new abilities like interdimensional teleportation, let's break it all down. Back in earlier seasons, the Demogorgon seemed like a typical horror movie monster, a one-off humanoid horror that stalked Hawkins in 1983. Later seasons changed that view completely and gave us a ton of new information. It made clear that the Demogorgon is part of a full species with a complete life cycle, a native predator of the Upside Down that existed long before Vecna arrived. When Henry Creel is first thrown into the Upside Down in 1979, he sees a Demogorgon already there, doing what it always does, hunting. That moment quietly confirms that Vecna didn't create these creatures. They belong to this dimension the way sharks belong to the ocean, and he only learns how to bend them to his will later. The Demogorgon starts in a tiny larva stage. The larva looks like a slimy slug, and it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's implanted into a living host by the Upside Down's vines and tendrils. Those vines are part plant and part animal, connected to the same hive mind that Vecna later rules. They snake out of the walls and ground, wrap around victims, and then push a gross tendril down the throat to plant the larva inside. That's what happens to Will Byers and Barb in Season 1 and later to Eleven when she's attacked by the flesh version of the Mind Flayer. The larva grows inside the host until it's either coughed up or it bursts out after the host dies. Once the larva is out, it becomes what the kids call a pollywog. At first, it looks like a strange tadpole with a tail and a simple mouth, but no face. Then things start to speed up. The creature grows front legs, then back legs, turning into a crawling amphibious horror. Its skin shifts from dark to a strange green as it develops and ages. After that, it hits the Demodog stage, where it really starts to resemble the Demogorgon that we all know and hate. The mouth splits into 5 petals lined with teeth, opening like a flower made of knives. Even here it still has a tail and it moves like a hunting dog, fast and low to the ground. As it matures further, the Demodog's skin turns pale gray or white, the tail becomes less pronounced, and the body stretches taller and leaner. In the final stage, the tail disappears completely, and the creature stands upright as a full Demogorgon. At this point, it's roughly 9 feet tall, with arms as long as its legs, able to run on all 4s or stalk forward on 2 legs like a person. Every change in the life cycle explains a piece of its design, from that long reach to the way it can suddenly rear up before attacking. Anatomy-wise, the Demogorgon is built to dominate whatever environment it enters. Its skin is tough, enough that regular gunfire barely slows it down. Only shots that get inside the open mouth really have a chance of putting it down, and even then, it takes a lot of damage to kill it for good. Its sense of smell is sharp enough to track blood across distance like a shark in the water, and that isn't just a metaphor. The creators of the show themselves describe the Demogorgon as closer to the shark from Jaws than to a typical supernatural horror villain. When it breaches into our world, it behaves like a deep-sea predator bursting through the surface, grabbing victims and dragging them back into its own territory to feed. On top of that raw strength, the Demogorgon hates heat. Fire and high temperatures hurt it in a way that firearms often don't. Hawkins' lab used fire to hold back the spreading gate in Season 2, and every encounter shows that flames and high heat force the Upside Down's creatures to retreat. When Jonathan and Nancy set the original 1983 Demogorgon on fire, it screams and falls back in agony. For whatever reason, fire is able to carve through them far easier than any bullets. The part that really changed everything was how the show linked the Demogorgons to the hive mind. When Henry is first pulled into the Upside Down, the Demogorgon he sees is independent. It isn't under anyone's psychic control, it's just hunting. Later, he goes further and flays the minds of the Demogorgons themselves. He forces them into the hive mind the same way he later invades the minds of Hawkins' citizens. That means a fully grown Demogorgon under Vecna's control isn't just one mind. It's 2 minds sharing one body, the original beast and the curse sitting on top of it, directing it like a puppet. There are small hints that the original mind never fully disappears. Dart, the Demodog that Dustin adopts, proves that. Dart is clearly part of the army that storms Hawkins in Season 2, which means it's under Vecna's influence. Yet when Dustin gives it the same chocolate bar it first ate as a tiny pollywog, something clicks. For a moment, Dart pauses, looks at him, and lets Dustin and his friends pass. The chocolate is tied to Dart's childhood, in a manner of speaking, the one memory strong enough to cut through the hive mind for a split second. It suggests that even inside the curse, there's still a creature that can feel and remember. That detail becomes very important later when another person tries to tap into that same network from the other side. Season 4 also gave us a look at the Russian Demogorgon and why it exists at all. The Russians had been spying on the Hawkins experiments and learned about the Upside Down. From there, they tried to open their own gates on Soviet soil, but their attempts failed unless the gate was anchored to Hawkins, where Eleven and Vecna's presence had thinned the barrier between dimensions. Eventually, though, they managed to access the Upside Down long enough to capture native creatures and, I'd say, bring them back to a remote prison. One of those captives became the Russian Demogorgon, a starved predator kept in a pit and fed prisoners as entertainment and test subjects. Inside the lab connected to that prison, scientists were doing more than just feeding a monster. They were experimenting with the hive mind itself. They used heat on the Demogorgons, not just to hurt them, but to drive out the cloud of particles that represent Vecna's influence. In other words, they tried performing a kind of exorcism. When the particles were trapped, the Demogorgons were cut off from the hive mind. The first time Hopper and the others see the Russian Demogorgon fight, what they're really seeing is the creature's own nature without Vecna's control pulling the strings. That's why that first fight is so vicious. It's the raw Demogorgon, unfiltered. This also solves one of the big questions from earlier seasons. The 1983 Hawkins Demogorgon can pull itself between dimensions and even create small doorway gates. The Russian one doesn't. The simple rule that falls out of Season 4's explanation is that Demogorgons only gain that interdimensional travel ability when they're plugged into the hive mind directly. The power to open portals isn't something their bodies can do on their own. It's something Vecna gives and amplifies when he sits at the center of that web. Without him, they're still terrifying, but they're trapped wherever they physically are. All of that sets the stage for what happens in Season 5. By the time the story jumps forward, the barrier between the two dimensions is weaker than ever. Vecna has wrapped Hawkins in a vast flesh wall with the upside-down version of Hawkins' lab sitting at its heart. Inside that wall, he isn't just murdering people, he's collecting children, plugging them into tubes full of goo the same way he once plugged Will into the vines. If those tendrils once spread Demogorgon larvae through human hosts, now it looks as though Vecna is turning that process into a factory, creating new vessels and even more soldiers. Outside that wall, the Demogorgons become his favorite tool. One of the first major Season 5 set pieces shows exactly how far they've evolved under his command. During the military incursion at the Upside-Down boundary, a Demogorgon sent as Vecna's puppet tears through trained soldiers like they're nothing. It charges into the fight, shrugs off gunfire, and when the survivors try to escape in a truck, it simply runs them down. It leaps onto the moving vehicle and claws its way over the canvas roof like a wild animal ripping into prey. The takeaway from this scene is clear. These things aren't just strong. They're now fast enough and focused enough to chase down modern vehicles and not only tear them apart, but do so without much effort, too. At the same time, the barrier between worlds is so thin that Demogorgons no longer need carefully prepared gates from Vecna. One Demogorgon rips straight through the weakened membrane between dimensions and opens a fresh portal inside Holly Wheeler's world, snatching her the same way the original monster once took Will. Later, during the trap for Derek Turnbow, another Demogorgon casually tears open multiple portals around the house, stepping in and out of spaces like it's passing through sheets of paper. Under Vecna's control and increased power, Demogorgons behave like walking keys, able to cut holes between worlds whenever and wherever the fabric of reality is weak enough. The more easily these monsters can walk between the Upside Down and the normal world, the closer Vecna's long-term goal gets. By the time all the Demogorgons start bursting through portals around the military quarantine area, and portals begin opening all over town, it's obvious that the Upside Down is no longer a separate other place. It's starting to merge. Vecna uses Demogorgons and other creatures the way a commander uses infantry. First, they break defenses, then he steps through afterward, confident that human weapons are useless. Even here, their old weaknesses still apply. Flamethrowers and high heat hurt them, And when the military bathes the Demogorgons in fire, they scream and burn. The twist is that Vecna himself has learned to ignore even that. After the flames do their work, he arrives through the portal, uses his telekinesis to kill the remaining soldiers, and then shows off a new ability. He raises the dead Demogorgons, pulling them back into the fight like a necromancer recalling his army. It turns the idea of a final stage in the Demogorgon life cycle into a question mark. Death isn't truly death. As long as Vecna sits at the center of the hive mind, death for these creatures can be temporary. Season 5 also gives the clearest answer yet to why Demogorgons follow Vecna in the first place. They don't serve him out of loyalty. They serve him because he's sitting inside their minds. When he flayed their thoughts and dragged them into the hive, he turned them into extensions of himself. They patrol the fleshy wall around Hawkins, attack the military in the Upside Down, drag Holly into his Mind Palace version of his house, and strike at anyone who threatens his project. They're his teeth and claws, used to disable human armies, collect more children for the tubes, and tear open the world so the Upside Down can spread. Instead of a predator honoring its stronger alpha, it's a slave obeying its master. At the same time, the season quietly proves that his control isn't absolute. Will Byers has always been connected to the Upside Down, but Season 5 finally explains why that connection feels different. When Vecna first took Will in 1983, he didn't just possess him and then leave. That attack changed Will on a deep level, leaving a permanent link between his mind and the hive. In Season 5, Will can see through Vecna's eyes when he targets people like Holly and Derek. Later, he can see through the eyes of a Demogorgon, acting as a spy from the inside. He even feels what they feel. When the military burns the Demogorgons, Will collapses in agony because the pain that flows through the hive mind flows through him too. Over the course of the season, that connection stops being one way. The kids begin to treat Will less like a victim and more like a potential weapon. Mr. Clark's lessons about wormholes and unstable portals help frame what's happening around them. The Upside Down is full of unstable tiers, and the Demogorgons are using them all the time. If Vecna can use the hive mind to coordinate that movement, then someone else plugged into that same network might be able to interfere or even override it. That idea is backed up by the lore parallels the season keeps dropping. The Eye of Vecna in Dungeons & Dragons allows a user to see through Vecna's vision and use his power against him. In Season 5, Will basically becomes that eye in a living human form. Thanks to his connection to Vecna, he can, at least in some ways, influence the Demogorgons. All of this loops back around to the question of origin and purpose. Demogorgons began as apex predators of the Upside Down, born from larvae that the vines spread through living hosts. Once Vecna gained power, he took them, claimed their minds, and turned them into psychic soldiers that could cross dimensions as long as they stayed under his command. That's why the 1983 monster could claw through walls and appear where it wanted. Why the Russian Demogorgon couldn't do that until the particles were released back into the hive, and why the Season 5 Demogorgons now rip open portals left and right. Their purpose in the story has evolved from simple monster to living proof that the line between worlds is collapsing, and that whoever controls the hive mind controls the creatures that move between those worlds. Season 5 adds one last layer of theory on top of this. The show keeps hinting that the Mind Flayer, the shapeless darkness that first took control of Vecna, may still sit above everything. Some expanded lore says the Mind Flayer gave Henry his powers and has been influencing him since his time in Dimension X. Whatever the case may be, the Demogorgons sit at the point where all of these powerful forces meet. They're native to the Upside Down, warped by the Mind Flayer's particles, bound into Vecna's hive mind, and now exposed to Will's stolen powers. In the end, the Demogorgons aren't just background monsters anymore. Season 4 built them out as a full species with a brutal life cycle, a clear weakness to fire, and a direct link to Vecna's hive mind. Season 5 then takes that foundation and shows what happens when that species is turned into an army, capable of opening portals wherever the barrier is weak, running down trucks in the real world, and tearing through soldiers in the Upside Down. Now that death isn't the end of their lives, or at least not always. We might still have new forms of leveled up Demogorgons we're yet to see. But for now, that's the whole story. Do you like how the lore has evolved and different mysteries have started being solved? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see more Stranger Things content and theories, click the video on screen now.